So Apple's product lineup for the iPads is actually kind of ridiculous. So if you were to buy a new iPad today, there are five models you could pick from. You could pick from the iPad Pro, the Air, the iPad 10th generation, the iPad 9th generation, or the iPad mini. And for the average consumer to figure out what product they need, this is way too much. And as someone who has an iPad, I honestly don't really use this enough to even justify having it anymore, because I used to use it for note taking and all of that, but recently I haven't needed to take handwritten notes. And now, with the new Apple Pencil being cheaper than $129 and the 10th generation iPad being cheaper than the iPad Air, I wouldn't have bought this combination right here years ago, but I bought it because it was the only option at the time that wasn't abnormally priced. Now, each iPad in the lineup can all do the same things because Apple gives each iPad more processing power. So the M1 chip is in the iPad Air, the M2 is in the iPad Pros, the A14 is in the 10th generation iPad, the A13 is in the 9th generation iPad, and the A15 is in the iPad mini. So these chips are kind of all over the place, and I personally think the iPad has more than enough power. You know, on the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, you can run Final Cut Pro, you can run Logic, you can kind of do all these things that we've been wanting for a while from Apple, but no one's actually really using them because iPad OS is holding back these iPads. Now, I think Apple should kind of give every iPad the M chip across the board, because if they do that in the 11th generation iPad, and maybe the M2 in the Air, and then the M3 in the Pro, it'll allow them to essentially diversify the lineup, as well as also clean up this 5 devices to pick from, because the 9th and 10th generation iPad are so similar, but the 9th generation still has the old design, it still has a home button, and it still has an 8 megapixel camera, where every other iPad has 12 megapixels, and also it still uses Lightning. So, as Apple has every other product now using USB-C. My iPhone's on USB-C, my iPad's on USB-C, my MacBook's on USB-C. Why do I still need a Lightning iPad? Now, I know this solution probably works for a majority of places and even maybe companies, but a lot of companies want bigger iPads for their tipping machines and such like that, as a lot of us have seen out in daily life. So they're buying the 12.9-inch iPad Pro and not even using it for everything it can use because they need the biggest one for the consumer, but they just can't offer that. Now, the 9th generation also only is the one to feature 4G, while the other ones all feature 5G, and that really doesn't matter anymore. I feel like most people tend to not get their iPad cellular connectivity, and if they do get them with cellular connectivity, I honestly think your battery would be dead before you would even really be able to use it, because that is another issue with the iPads, and kind of why I think they just don't even make sense, to the point where I feel like we might not even need them anymore, because the product lineup has gotten so confusing to the average consumer that they don't even know what iPad to pick. And then when Apple is charging $429 for the 10th generation iPad, it's kind of ridiculous with how much they're charging for some of these iPads, when the predecessor was $329 and you're not really getting much more besides the redesign and USB-C, which from the consumer standpoint is kind of ridiculous that that's how much more it would cost, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Now look, I understand they've given us more features, like my iPad Air has the redesign with the smaller bezels, Touch ID and the power button, the newer Apple Pencil support, as well as the M1 chip. And now I'm not saying they shouldn't do any of these, but it kind of doesn't make sense that my iPad Air doesn't have a flash. The iPad mini has a flash. What if I needed the flash in my iPad? The only one you can get with a flash is the iPad mini? That kind of doesn't make sense. And they're doing all these weird kind of things that it doesn't make sense. But what's most limiting to these iPads is their software, because there are some great things like Sidecar and Universal Control, which I use all the time, and really, do I need an iPad? I could just get a second monitor to do that. I don't really need to use my iPad for that, but I use my iPad because I have it, and that's really it. But iPadOS 17 is in such a weird spot, and just iPadOS in general, because of how underdeveloped Apple has made it. They basically took iOS and put it on the iPad, which it used to actually be the same software, which I think would have been better than trying to deviate between iOS and iPadOS, because now my iPhone gets features that my iPad won't get until next year, which doesn't make sense to me at all. With iPadOS 16, this iPad was not given the new lock screen, whereas my iPhone was. But with iPadOS 17, the really only new thing you gave me was the lock screen customization onto my iPad, which should have just been added with iPadOS 16. But you diversified them to make them two separate product lines because there really isn't much they can add to this to keep consumers coming back, I feel like. Because you're just bringing features a year later to this that my iPhone has. So it doesn't make sense to me. Now also, iPadOS still kind of will give you the mobile versions of sites and apps when it's more than capable of running the desktop version. Now you can go in and change that, which personally I feel like I do more than less, but it's okay. There are some sites it kind of works better with in the mobile version. Now, when Apple obviously does do the software for iPadOS, they do bring over a majority of the features that come with iOS 17, and this year it was like that. Last year, as I said before, it really wasn't like that, and the headlining feature for this is lock screen customization, which doesn't make sense to me when you could honestly design a whole new software for this. And now I'm not saying bring macOS. That is not at all what I'm saying, because I don't think that is the answer. I'm essentially kind of saying there's got to be some in between, like let me place my app icons wherever I want, let me place my widgets wherever I want. I shouldn't be constricted to what my iPhone has to look like. Now, look, this may change with iOS 18, as we are hearing a lot of rumors, and this is supposedly going to be a substantial upgrade, but that's way far out there. But overall, the iPads are in such a confusing spot, and I really feel there's becoming no need for them, because if you have an iPhone and you have a MacBook, you don't really need to fill in that gap anymore because of how powerful these MacBooks are, and they can do so much now, where I'm honestly inclined to take my MacBook, which has higher brightness than my iPad Air, wherever I go, because I can see my MacBook more than I can see my iPad. But Apple didn't release any iPads this year, which is another reason why I feel like this is kind of driving the whole we don't need iPads, because you went a whole year without releasing new ones. And honestly, as someone who would have bought a new iPad to replace my iPad Air, because it is almost 2 years old now, I don't really think I would have needed one, but I need one from the battery perspective, because as I said before, the batteries in these are so small, I feel like, that my iPad's constantly dead. And yes, I'm using Stage Manager and all these other features that they did add, but if it's supposed to be a computer replacement, I should be able to use these features and get through my day. Whereas on my Mac, I can use Stage Manager and edit videos and do so much and have 70% left for the rest of the day. This would be at 7. But we don't really know what the future's going to hold. Maybe we'll get some new iPads next year. But I want you to remember, today's a good day to make a great day. And I'll talk to you in the next one, because right now, I want to go out and buy an iPad. Peace.